Oh, hello. I still didn't see you come in there. Well, thank you for tuning in again to Will's Book Vlogs. To give you a little bit of background on the show, I used to be a very avid reader. I read all the time, and college and papers and video games and doing a bunch of theater kind of like had me fall out of the pattern of reading. And I got to a point in 2015 when I was reflecting on my year and I realized, man, I did not read a single book in 2015, and that was a little like that was a little bit crushing for me as someone who considers themselves an avid reader. So I set a New Year's resolution. I was set out to read 12 books this year, or about a book a month. Reading a book a month already, why not record a little review of it and share my thoughts? And here we are. This is what we're doing. I hope you're a fan of Baltic Productions proper. If you're not a fan, welcome. This is just one of many shows we have. We run a couple of podcasts, and we do other things on YouTube, and we do some short films. So hopefully you stick around a while and enjoy some of our other content. You're not here for me. You're here for Aziz Ansari, Modern Romance. A little bit background on me before I jump into the actual review proper. When I was a kid growing up, I was a really big fan of a newspaper called The Onion. And then there was a love and relationship advice column in the back of The Onion called Savage Love. It was written by one of my heroes, one of the people that inspired me to start creating my own. His name is Dan Savage. And the column took me to listening to a Savage Love podcast. And the Savage Love podcast took me to reading a lot of hard science, nonfiction studies in human sexuality and relationships and love and that kind of thing. So this book was pretty much like in my wheelhouse already. Basic premise of this book is Aziz had a lot of questions of what is the modern dating landscape like? What is different about dating in the 21st century where we text more than we call, where roughly a third of all relationships that were formed in 2014 were started from online social media dating profiles? What do all the swiping and the likes and the Instagram follows, like what does it all mean? How is it changing our culture? I think a lot of people see the name Aziz on the title and they think, oh, it's a funny little book about love by a comedian. There's a lot of comedy books. It's a pretty popular genre. The book is co-authored between Aziz and a guy named Eric Kleinenberg. I think it's Kleinberg. I'm sorry, Eric, if I got your name wrong. But Eric Kleinberg is a sociology professor at New York at NYU. He's also the author of a book called Going Solo, which is about the rise of people not getting married and like living a bachelor lifestyle and kind of like bachelor not having a stigma anymore. Like people are just like living alone, and they actually, if you read the book, they actually live more fulfilling socially and emotionally rich lives than the average person monogamous relationship, which is interesting. So like this is a pretty good rock star pair, but you'd think it's mostly like a comedy book with a few fraught facts or whatever, but in reality it's really a nonfiction book that is a pretty deep dive into the modern dating landscape. You know, like there's probably a dozen to 24 university professors in various fields that are quoted in this. The book is just filled to the brim with citations and, and like infographic that are all like really neat and clean. I think one of the most interesting and successful sections of the book, if you look here, they kind of map out what is a successful like social media profile for like a Match.com or like an OkCupid or like a Tinder. As someone who's pretty well read in modern sexuality, modern dating and that kind of thing, there's not that much that like blew my hat off or was a lot of new information that I hadn't heard before. The strongest advantages or points of pride that this book does is it takes a lot of like really big concepts and a lot of like big boring data, and it makes it really like kind of fun and entertaining, and I mean it makes it a little bit sexy, I'm not gonna lie. Aziz Ansari has a really successful brand. And he has a really particular style of comedy that I think really speaks to my generation in particular. He's found a way to like speak to millennials about this time we're living in, about how unsure it is, and all that thing. And he's kind of talking to us and making jokes that are really interesting, but it doesn't feel like an ad agency on like Madison Avenue said, "This is what the kids are into, #squad." It's story and analysis coming from a person who is living in the modern dating landscape just like the rest of us. I mean, I think one of the other most positive things that this book has to offer is, I think, in any book like this that looks at modern times or starts to talk about how we don't have face-to-face conversations as much anymore, everything is through a text message, stuff like that. I think there's a kind of a trope in literature and academia to kind of like de facto blame technology. Facebook is ruining our society. Kids tweet in these little sound bites and they don't mean anything. But like Aziz is like 31 when this book is written, you know, and like he lived through and rose to stardom in the age of Facebook going on, in the age of Twitter becoming a big thing or whatever. So he has a lot more, I won't say it's always positive, but he has a much more nuanced view of like what's going on. He doesn't write all this stuff off like I think older generations like very stereotypically might. When he gets into like what's going on with Tinder, what's going on with OkCupid, this and that, he's not starting from an adversarial place of this is what's wrong with society. And so I think it leads to a much more sophisticated and in-depth analysis. Like the focus of the book is on heteronormative relationships in America. They're kind of also like probably like a little bit like middle and upper middle class. You know, like they're focusing a lot on cities like New York and LA. They're focusing on people who have smartphones, who go on Tinder dates 3 or 4 times a week. Certain people of certain socioeconomic brackets, like they're not necessarily like living that lifestyle. But I mean, well, you know, like they're very upfront about like this is what we're doing. They're very upfront about like there's a whole LGBT world and here's like a few pages on it. But frankly, this is a whole nother book and we need to narrow the focus of this book to get any type of like successful analysis out of it. But one of the things the book does do is it does go a little bit global, and it goes, I think the two most interesting sections of this book is they go to Tokyo, Japan, and they kind of give a really in-depth analysis of like, frankly, the sex crisis that's happening in Tokyo right now. Like young people aren't getting in relationships, they're not marrying, they're not having kids. Like if it continues by like 2035, I mean this is a statistic, it might be wrong. I'm doing this from memory, I'm not going to look it up in the book. But by 2035, the procreation and marriage rate stays at where they are in Japan. Population of Japan is going to go from about 120 million people to about 87 million people. So like they're about to lose 25% of their population because like the youth of their culture are just like not interested in sex. And they go really deep down and like, why is that? What's going on? And there's like a lot of like kind of stereotypes about Japan that you think would be one thing then end up another. You know, like Japan's always on like the cutting edge of technology, and they're always like, they're an early adopter society for technology. So, you know, like if Tinder is huge in America right now, like what kind of crazy sophisticated dating app does Japan have right now? It's actually not the case. Like the youth there are just like really not interested in dating, and like there's a really strong, interesting analysis of why that is, and a lot of it has to do with sexes balancing out, a lot of it has to do with their economy. Their economy has gotten gutted from the 70s. There's not like a business class executive people anymore. Very similar to here, you know, like we're in a globalized economy now, and there's not a white collar guaranteed middle class that like you just get there if you have a college degree. And the other place they go that is also really interesting is Buenos Aires, which apparently is something I didn't know. Buenos Aires is like really kind of known as like one of the major cities of love. You know, like it's one of the most casual sex positive places in the country. Argentinian men are also like very, very known for how aggressive and persistent they are towards women, and so they kind of analyze and like look at some of the dynamics of dating in Buenos Aires, and so you kind of get this like really nice balanced kind of view of like, here's one extreme on the way promiscuous side, and then like here's another extreme on the very, very like we're just not having sex at all extreme, and it kind of puts America like in the middle of everything. So I mean, it's really interesting. One of the other parts of this book I really liked a lot is they went to they got out of the cities and they went to small towns. They went to Wichita. And they kind of compared of like what's Tinder and OkCupid like in Wichita. And you kind of found that in some of these smaller cities or smaller communities, like dating trends are much similar to the way what they used to be. You know, like you're marrying your neighbor across the street, you're marrying your high school sweetheart, you're marrying, like, I think one of the most amazing statistics to me is in places like Wichita, the average age that women marry is about 22 or 23. Men, it's more like 24, 25. But if you move to LA and like do that same analysis, it's like 28, 29 or like 31, 32. People in Wichita are marrying way faster. Everything to do with like there's not as much choice, and there's not this endless supply, like there's not an endless supply on your smartphone of people to choose from. And you kind of have to take what you get and settle down really fast a little bit. So, I mean, those are some of the interesting aspects of modern romance. Aziz and Eric talk a lot about how we're living more and more of our lives outside of the temporal. In a sense of, like, we don't have face-to-face conversations anymore. Like, what we're doing right now, it kind of feels like a face-to-face conversation. But like it's really not a face-to-face conversation, you know, like I've scripted this, I have notes, I'm gonna go edit this to make myself look good. I mean, and you're just looking at it as a passive audience member, consuming it on your free time, pausing, rewinding as much as you can, and like those are benefits real face-to-face live conversation don't have. But like we're spending more and more time in, like, call it the phone world, and the majority of the type of communication we have with each other is in texting. And texting exists out of a time and space. You have an unlimited amount of time to draft and craft the perfect response. You have an opportunity to bring a draft of a text to as many friends as you want. You know, you can take I have a smiley face dolphin eggplant. What does that mean? And then you can go around to your friends and try and figure out what that means. These younger and younger generations, we're losing the part of our brain that has a strong sense of like social cues and reacts well to body language. We're losing the nuance of speech beyond the actual textual. But on the other hand, like the analytical, like writing part of our brain, like where kids are way outperforming one or two generations ago as their analytical skills, their grammar, their sentence structures or whatever, because like this is the way we talk all the time. So I mean, like, I guess modern romance is a really good, solid introduction to some like very deep and broad topics that are kind of going around academia right now. If you're looking for it as a more of like a how-to guide, there are some really good pro tips of like how to be successful in the modern world, like how to run a successful online dating site. So like that's an aspect of this book too. It's also just like really funny, man. Like it's really, really, really entertaining. I mean, and it a little bit feels like you had gone to graduate school with Aziz, and like you're a little bit like hanging out with him and sitting through like a 3 or 4 hour presentation. He's an incredibly smart, gifted person or whatever, but I mean, I do feel like a little bit like exposed to a side of him that I haven't like seen before, of like he is like interested in intellectual and like academic activities. I mean, like one of the things I've learned about him from reading this book is like he graduated with a degree in biology, and like he was never on like this entertainment track. It's something he kind of like backstepped into because he was like a funny guy, and he's kind of like, well, I like making jokes. So I mean, that's pretty cool. If you're looking if you're new to the topic or like this area of study, I would say this is like one of the best like starting off points. If you're entering a freshman seminar in human relationships or modern dating or human heterosexuality, like this is a great freshman reading book. If you're into the thick of it already and you're already reading like research studies and dissertations and that kind of thing of like, you might not find much value in this book. It may feel like a little shallow. You might be a little annoyed by the comedic tone to it or whatever, but I mean, it is what it is. Thanks for watching, and remember, I'm going to be more confident with my catchphrase this time. Keep reading.